Have you ever pondered why the 7 deadly sins hold such significance in our lives and moral decisions? These 7 sins, better known as capital vices, have a rich history steeped in ancient philosophy and religious teachings. From Aristotle's golden mean theory that virtues can morph into vices when in excess, to St. Thomas Aquinas' identification of pride, envy, lust, gluttony, greed, sloth and wrath as the primary temptations, these sins have shaped our understanding of morality and ethics. The number 7, symbolizing perfection across cultures and religions, further adds to the significance, creating a balance of 7 virtues and vices. These sins represent harmful behaviors that stem from excessive desires for self-recognition, possessions and pleasure, leading to moral degradation and spiritual separation. Join us as we delve into the intriguing world of the 7 deadly sins, their biblical references and why they are indeed deadly. The first of the 7 deadly sins, pride, often considered the most severe. Pride, in its raw form, is an inflated sense of self-worth. It's a sin that whispers to us that we are better, more deserving, and more important than others. It's a deceptive voice that tells us we don't need help, especially not from a higher power. This is where the biblical teachings come into play. The Bible warns us about the dangers of pride. Proverbs, for instance, declares, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." This ancient wisdom suggests that an overinflated sense of self-importance can lead to our downfall. Pride makes us vulnerable to mistakes, as it blinds us to our own weaknesses and imperfections. This inflated sense of self can also create a barrier between us and others. Pride leads us to believe we are superior, causing a rift in our relationships. It isolates us, not only from those around us but also from God. It's a sin that tells us we don't need God, that we can navigate this world on our own. But the Bible teaches us otherwise. It tells us that we are all equal in the eyes of God, that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. It reminds us that we need God's grace to navigate through life's challenges. Pride, however, blinds us to this truth. It makes us believe we are invincible, that we don't need God's guidance or grace. Pride, in essence, blinds us to our own flaws and distances us from divine grace. Next on our list is envy, the desire for others' traits, status, abilities, or situation. This green-eyed monster, as it's often called, is a pervasive force, lurking in the shadows of our hearts, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Let's take a journey through the ancient texts where the Bible sheds light on this capital vice. Envy is mentioned numerous times, each instance highlighting its destructive nature. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30, it's stated that envy rots the bones, a vivid depiction of the harm it causes, not just spiritually but physically too. Manifesting as resentment towards others for their possessions or accomplishments, envy fosters feelings of discontent. It's a relentless hunger, a thirst that cannot be quenched, as we constantly compare ourselves to others, always wanting more. The harm lies not just in the desire for more, but in the resentment that arises when we see others have what we crave. This resentment breeds negativity, sowing seeds of bitterness and unhappiness. It's a downward spiral, leading us away from gratitude and contentment and towards dissatisfaction and spiritual degradation. Envy blinds us to our own blessings, making us focus on what we lack rather than what we have. It's a barrier that prevents us from appreciating the abundance in our own lives. It robs us of joy, leaving us feeling empty and unfulfilled. In the grand scheme of things, envy detracts from our journey towards spiritual growth. By fostering discontent and resentment, it hinders us from finding peace within ourselves. It's a battle we must fight, a vice we must overcome, to truly embrace the virtues of gratitude and contentment. Envy, therefore, sows seeds of dissatisfaction, preventing us from finding peace within ourselves. Let us now turn our attention to gluttony, lust and greed, the sins born of excessive desires. These 3 sins represent an overindulgence in food, physical desires and material wealth, respectively. Gluttony in biblical terms is the overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. In Proverbs 25, verse 27, we read, "It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory." This verse highlights the ill effects of overindulgence not just in food, but in anything that feeds our ego. Next, we come to lust, a sin driven by an excessive craving for the pleasures of the body. In the first letter of John, chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, the Apostle John warns us, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." Lust, therefore, not only corrupts our moral compass, but also separates us from the eternal life promised by God. Then there's greed, the insatiable desire for wealth or possessions. In Luke 12, verse 15, Jesus warns, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." This teaches us that life's worth is not measured by material wealth, but by our spiritual richness. These sins of excess, gluttony, lust, and greed can lead to moral and spiritual decay. They blind us to the needs of others, turning our focus inwards, leading us down a path of self-destruction. Consumed by our excessive desires, we lose sight of our spiritual purpose and drift away from God's path. Gluttony, lust, and greed thus blind us to the needs of others and turn us inwards, away from God and towards self-destruction. We arrive now at the final two sins, sloth and wrath, representing neglect of duty and uncontrolled anger. Sloth isn't merely about physical laziness, but also spiritual indolence. It's the reluctance to exert effort, the refusal to act when action is needed, and a lack of enthusiasm in fulfilling one's responsibilities. Sloth is like a weight that drags us down, preventing us from reaching our full potential. It's the comfortable chair that keeps us from the garden of our duties. In the Bible, Proverbs 6, verses 6 to 11, warns us against this sin, using the diligent ant as an example. It's a lesson about the dangers of complacency and the rewards of hard work. On the other hand, wrath is an emotional wildfire, a volatile explosion of uncontrolled anger. It's not the fleeting irritation or the justified anger in response to injustice. Wrath is the seething rage that refuses to be quelled, the violent tempest that leaves destruction in its wake. In Ephesians 4, verse 26, the Bible advises us not to sin in our anger and not to let the sun go down while we're still angry. This teaches us to manage our anger, to resolve conflicts before they escalate, to seek peace rather than revenge. But why are these sins so deadly? Both sloth and wrath disrupt our moral compass and lead to spiritual degradation. Sloth, by promoting neglect and indifference, stifles growth and progress. It's the refusal to sow good seeds and thus the failure to reap a good harvest. Wrath, on the other hand, engenders hatred and violence, poisoning relationships and shattering communities. It's the storm that uproots the tree of peace. Sloth and wrath, therefore, are destructive forces that hinder our spiritual growth and well-being. These sins, like the other five, are not simply about personal failings, but also about the harm they inflict on others and the community. Recognizing and overcoming these sins is a step towards a more virtuous life, a life that is in harmony with others, with nature, and with the divine. We have journeyed through the 7 deadly sins, exploring their biblical roots and understanding why they are truly deadly. These sins, more accurately termed as capital vices, have their origins rooted in ancient philosophical and religious teachings, playing a significant role in shaping our understanding of virtues and vices. First, we explored pride, often considered the deadliest of all sins. It's the excessive belief in one's own abilities, which often blinds us to the grace of God. It's the sin from which all others arise, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. Next, we delved into envy, the desire for others' traits, status, abilities, or situation. It's a sin that breeds resentment and discontent, poisoning our hearts with bitterness. Then we discussed lust, an intense desire for physical, material, or abstract things. It's the sin that makes us prioritize our desires over others' well-being, leading us down a path of selfishness. Our journey continued to gluttony, not just the overindulgence and overconsumption of food or drink, but the excessive desire for anything. It's the sin that makes us forget the value of moderation. We addressed greed, the desire for material wealth or gain, disregarding the realm of the spiritual. It's the sin that ties our happiness to material possessions, distancing us from spiritual fulfillment. Our exploration led us to sloth, the avoidance of physical or spiritual work. It's the sin that makes us neglect our responsibilities and potential, robbing us of the fruits of growth. Finally, we concluded with wrath, an uncontrolled feeling of anger, rage, and even hatred. It's the sin that disrupts our peace and harmony, leading us to act in ways we might later regret. Remember, the number 7 symbolizes perfection in various cultures and religions, and the significance of these 7 vices lies in their ability to lead us away from this spiritual perfection. They are characterized by harmful behaviors stemming from excessive desires for self-recognition, possessions, and pleasure, ultimately leading to moral degradation and spiritual separation. Remember, awareness of these sins is the first step towards avoiding their trap and leading a more virtuous life. So why do the 7 deadly sins hold such significance in our lives? These sins hold such weight because they represent the excesses and deficiencies of our human nature. They're not just arbitrary rules set by a religious authority. Rather, they're a reflection of our potential to stray from the path of virtue and morality. The 7 deadly sins serve as a reminder of the pitfalls that can lead us towards moral and spiritual decay. Let's think about it. Pride, envy, lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, and wrath. Each of these sins represents an excessive desire for self-recognition, possessions, and pleasure. When left unchecked, these desires can consume us, leading us away from the path of righteousness and towards a life of vice. But it's not all doom and gloom. The beauty of recognizing these sins is that it gives us a chance to reflect, to examine our actions, and to make changes where necessary. It's a call to balance, to moderate our desires, and to strive for a life of virtue. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on our own lives. Have we ever fallen into the trap of these sins? Perhaps we've let our pride get the best of us. Or maybe we've succumbed to the allure of greed. Whatever the case may be, it's important to remember that we have the power to change, to choose virtue over vice, and to lead lives that are guided by love, humility, and generosity. In the end, understanding the 7 deadly sins is about more than just knowing what not to do. It's about recognizing the potential within us to lead lives of virtue and morality. It's about striving for balance, moderation, and righteousness in all that we do. If you found this discussion enlightening, please share your thoughts in the comments below and share your experiences as Christians dealing with these temptations. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the 7 deadly sins.